The key to doing repetitive statements in Java is using for loops. For loops typically turn up in this form. For int I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. I'll define what each of those does in a bit, but here, if I do exclamation point, this statement will print out this block of code will execute the printout statement 5 times. Run it. 5. If I increment this to, say, if I change this to 2, it'll do this twice. If I change this to 50, it'll do it 50 times. And if I did this to 500, it would print out 500 exclamation points. Right? Seems like a lot. All right. So this is pretty useful. Most for loops are of this form. For int I is equal to 0, then I is less than some number, and then I plus plus, which means essentially if you see this format, then this statement will be executed, or this block of code, in other words, everything that's in here will be executed that number of times. I'm not out. Print line. So if I change this to 2, it'll print out a grand total of 4 lines, right? It will do the bang, and they'll do high. It'll do bang, and they'll do high. Fairly straightforward. But what do each of those parts of the for loop mean? Because unless we understand that, we really can't kind of use it the way we need to. So again, print this out. So here, what we do is that we've got 3 parts of an if statement. We've got this first initialization, then we've got this precondition, and then we've got this post statement. So what are each of those parts? Well, first, the initialization gets run when we initially hit a loop. Kind of makes sense, right? Initialization. So this statement, over here, we create a variable called I and set its value equal to 0 at the beginning of this for loop. We could do whatever we wanted here. We could, it just has to make sense in the context of the rest of the loop. So for int I is equal to 0, this gets run exactly once and only when we hit the loop. Then what do? We say we have this precondition. We execute this loop each time we started anew, or we execute the precondition or evaluate the precondition each time that we hit the loop anew. And each time it evaluates to true, we run the body of the statement again. The body being anything that's between these curly braces. So long as this condition is true, we'll keep executing this statement. So this is always going to be a Boolean expression, right? So it's always going to evaluate to true or false. Finally, the third part of the loop, right? This was checked at the beginning, the precondition, but this is the post statement, which occurs at the end of the loop. So at the end of the loop, so in other words, or rather it occurs at the end of each time we run the body. So what we'll do is that each time we hit the end of this curly brace, we execute I++. I++ is just simply shorthand in Java for increment i's value by 1. It is shorthand for this following statement. I is equal to I plus 1. Which means take the value I, right? Increment it by 1. And then remember, this is an assignment statement over here, which says take this value, which is I plus 1, and store it in I. Remember, it's assignment, not equality. So this actually makes sense. This is an increment statement. This would just simply increment i's value by 1. This would decrease i's value by 1. This would decrease it by 100. Right? So, sorry, it was just off slightly, and that was bugging me. So, let's go ahead and run through this loop to see that it runs 5 times total, right? Run it, and it runs 5 times. So, how do we know that how does this work? Well, we hit it, we initialize, so we would create an int I is equal to 0. Then we check, hey, is I less than is I less than 5? If the statement was, say, reversed, this loop would never run. Is I greater than 5? No, it's not. See, it says over there in the pop-up, it's always false. 0 is greater than 5 is always false. So setting this up back to here, is 0 less than 5? Yes, it is. So we're going to print out a exclamation point. We hit the end, and then we execute I++, which increments i's value by 1. Now we are back at the top of the loop, right? And we have to check the precondition to see if we're going to run it again. Is I less than 5? Is 1 less than 5? Yes, it is. So we are going to increment it one more time. Sorry, we're going to print it out first. Then we're going to increment it, right? So we've got and now I is 2. So we printed it out twice so far. Is 2 less than 5? Yes, it is. Print it out. Increment. Is 3 less than 5? Yes, it is. Print it out. Increment. Is 4 less than 5? Yes, it is. Print it out. Increment. So we've done this 5 times total. It would have given us 5 exclamation points. Right? And the final statement, we incremented it to 5 finally. And let's see, is 5 less than 5? No, it's not. So the loop immediately terminates as soon as we hit a false statement once. So we get 5 exclamation points. It's fairly straightforward on how to do that. Another thing we can do with if statements, of course, is just is iterate over things. So, and we'll get into that a bit later, but let's go ahead and make this a bit more complicated, right? I said that basically I expect you guys to know how to do a running sum, so let's do that right now. Let's go ahead and create a value called int sum is equal to 0. And what I want to do with this for loop is I want to create the sum of, I want to sum up all the numbers that are multiples of 5 that are less than 1,000. Or between 0 and 1,000 rather. Okay, so in other words, I want the sum of 5, 10, 15, 20, 35, 40, 45, 50, and so on and so forth until we get to 1,000. Right, so let's go ahead and write that statement. All right, so let's go ahead and write sum. So let's see how that would look. All the numbers that are up to, and I want to include 1,000. So what I'm going to do is go up and do less than or equal to, or I could do all the numbers less than 1,001 that are multiples of 5. That seems better. If I mod 5 equals 0, what in the world? Sout. We're not going to sout anything. We are going to just simply sum plus equals. We're going to do sum is equal to sum plus I. Sout sum is a, let's go, I is a multiple of 5. We'll do that right here and run it. And so that's our answer. So how did that work? Well, with the if statement, right, we just simply ran this each time for each number between 0 and 1,000, right? We had this initial sum, and then we had the if statement. The if statement used the modular statement, which is asking basically if I divide by 5, if its remainder is 0. So that's what, so remember, the modulo statement, if you haven't learned it before, then I guess you can't remember, but it's a fairly straightforward statement, right? Using division, right, you would get in for the 4th grade, you'd get it into 2 parts, the quotient and the remainder, right? So here, I mod 5 gives me the remainder after I divide something by 5, which is either going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? Makes sense? The modular statement is amazingly awesome. So, for instance, if I've got some big number over here, big num, assuming I can type, big num mod 10, that will give me the very last digit. Which is pretty cool. That's actually quite useful, surprisingly. So anyway, what we would do then, if it was divisible by 5, is that we would say the sum, we are going to store inside sum the value that's currently stored inside sum plus I. And then we would print out I is a multiple of 5. And so that adds it all up. So most of the time, as I mentioned, we are going to be doing basically iterating over either a bunch of numbers, or we're going to be iterating over a collection of stuff like a string, which we'll get to when we handle strings in more detail. Let's see, actually, did I tackle strings already or no? I have a script and I can't stick to it. Well, let's go ahead and do that anyway, right? I'm going to assume that you've checked out that you know what a string is. That's reasonable, okay? But if you don't, there will be another video on strings, and you can come back to them. Come back to this portion. So for int I is equal to 0. So let's say we've got a string over here. String s is equal to hello. How are you today? Question mark. Right? A string is just simply a collection of a bunch of characters all put together with a bunch of extra operations put in. We get to treat it like a primitive, but it's actually a bit more powerful. So here we do for int I is equal to 0. I is less than s dot length. String s dot. Why is it not working? So, oh, right, because I'm outside of main, right? This is a common problem that you'll have sometime if you're just starting out in Java. You'll accidentally start typing outside of the main function. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than s dot length, I plus plus. And then what we'll do is that we go through each index. In other words, each individual letter of I. So I is equal to, let's see, so sout I, wait, nope, s dot caret I. So HELLO, comma, space HOWARE, with all the spaces put in there.